Picture this. It's 1934, the middle of the Great Depression, and some absolute madman just drove a diesel-powered coupe from Indianapolis to New York, averaging 46 miles per gallon, while Detroit's best engineers insisted it was impossible. Not a truck, not a tractor, but a legitimate passenger car with leather seats that ran on fuel costing half what gasoline did. Nathan Cummins and his airflow diesel coupe just proved everyone wrong and almost accidentally invented the fuel-efficient car movement 30 years before the oil crisis made it cool. Then America ignored it completely and spent the next 40 years pretending diesel passenger cars couldn't work. Depression era, America, and the gasoline addiction. Let's rewind to 1934. America is deep in the Depression. Unemployment is at 25%. People are lining up at soup kitchens, and yet somehow, the automotive industry is still cranking out 8-cylinder monsters that get maybe 12 miles per gallon if you're lucky. Ford's flathead V8 was the performance king. Cadillac had their 16-cylinder masterpiece for people who apparently hated money. Even the economy cars, and I use that term loosely, were getting maybe 15 miles per gallon on a good day with a tailwind. Here's what's insane. Gas was cheap, sure, about 18 cents a gallon in 1934, but when you're making 75 cents a day as a laborer, if you could find work at all, suddenly that 18 cents per gallon adds up. The average worker needed to labor for 15 minutes just to buy a single gallon of gas. Think about that. Detroit didn't care. They were in the horsepower game, the cylinder game, the who can build the biggest engine game. Fuel economy wasn't even in their vocabulary. The phrase miles per gallon barely existed in automotive advertising. You bought a car based on how many cylinders it had, how much chrome it carried, and whether your neighbors would be jealous. Practical concerns like not going broke buying fuel? That was for poor people. Meanwhile, Europe was taking a different path. Engineers in Germany were experimenting with compression ignition engines for passenger cars. Rudolf Diesel's invention from the 1890s was finally becoming practical. But in America, diesel was for bulldozers, tractors, ships, and trains. The idea of putting a diesel in a passenger car was like suggesting your grandmother should take up motorcycle racing. Technically possible, but why would anyone do that? The American automotive establishment had decided diesel would never work in cars. Too heavy, too noisy, too slow, smelled terrible, required preheating in cold weather. The fuel was dirty. The engines were agricultural. Real cars had gasoline engines that went vroom, not diesel engines that went clack, 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 like a sewing machine having a seizure. This was the conventional wisdom. This was what every engineer, every executive, every automotive journalist knew to be true. Diesel was fundamentally incompatible with passenger car use. End of discussion. Then Nathan Cummins showed up and said, "Hold my compression ratio." Enter Nathan Cummins and his insane idea. Nathan Cummins wasn't a car guy. He was a diesel guy. Big difference. He'd taken over Cummins Engine Company in Columbus, Indiana, back in 1919 when it was basically a failing machine shop. By the early 30s, they were building some of the best diesel engines in America. Industrial stuff, marine engines. Nothing sexy, nothing fast, just reliable power for boats and generators and equipment. But Cummins had this weird obsession. He believed, genuinely believed, that diesel engines belonged in passenger cars. His engineers thought he was nuts. His accountants thought he was wasting money. His wife probably questioned his sanity at dinner parties. But Cummins was stubborn. Or visionary. Probably both. Here's what he understood that Detroit didn't. Diesel fuel contained 15% more energy per gallon than gasoline. The compression ignition cycle was inherently more efficient than spark ignition. Diesel engines didn't need ignition systems that could fail. They were fundamentally more efficient at turning fuel into motion. The problem was making them work in a car. Industrial diesels were massive, weighing twice what comparable gasoline engines did. They ran at low RPMs, maybe 1200 to 2000 max. They vibrated like they were trying to shake themselves apart. The injection pumps were finicky. Cold starting was a nightmare. And the noise. Oh God, the noise. But Cummins saw potential where everyone else saw problems. In 1933, he started secretly working on a car diesel. Not an industrial engine shoehorned into a car. An actual automotive diesel designed from scratch for passenger car use. He chose the Chrysler Airflow as his platform, which tells you everything about Cummins' taste in controversial choices. The Airflow was Chrysler's radical aerodynamic experiment that the American public absolutely hated. Streamlined design, wind tunnel tested, weird looking as hell. It was a commercial disaster. Sales were tanking. Perfect, Cummins thought. Nobody's paying attention to the Airflow anyway. Let's make it even weirder by putting a diesel in it. He commissioned a custom 4-cylinder diesel engine, 140 cubic inches, modest by diesel standards, tiny by American V8 standards. But here's where it gets interesting. Cummins engineers had figured out how to make this diesel rev to 3,000 RPM. That might not sound impressive now, but in 1934, getting a diesel to sustain 3,000 RPM without exploding was basically witchcraft. They also solved the weight problem. The engine weighed just 500 pounds, still heavier than a comparable gas engine, but light years better than industrial diesels. Aluminum cylinder head. Special. Lightweight iron alloy block. Every unnecessary ounce eliminated. By spring of 1934, they had a running prototype. A Chrysler Airflow Coupe with a Cummins Model H diesel engine. From the outside, you couldn't tell it wasn't a regular Airflow. No smokestacks, no external oil coolers, no giant air starters. Cummins decided to prove his concept the American way, by driving it really far and seeing if it broke. Why everyone knew diesel would never work in cars. Before we get to the actual road trip, we need to understand why literally everyone thought Cummins was wasting his time. The conventional wisdom against diesel passenger cars wasn't just strong, it was basically religious conviction. First, there was the weight problem. Diesel engines operated at much higher compression ratios than gasoline engines. A gas engine in 1934 ran at maybe 6.5 to 1 compression. A diesel needed 16 to 1 or higher to achieve auto ignition. Those pressures required massively stronger engine blocks, reinforced crankshafts, beefier connecting rods. All that strength meant weight. Lots of weight. American car buyers in the 30s were obsessed with power-to-weight ratios. A heavy diesel that made less horsepower than a gas engine? That was going backward. Then there was the performance issue. Diesel engines made torque, not horsepower. Lots of low-end grunt, but they couldn't rev. A typical gas engine of the era would happily spin to 4,000 RPM or more. Diesels topped out at 2,000 if you were lucky. This meant diesel cars were fundamentally slower. Americans wanted speed, not efficiency. This was non-negotiable. The noise was another deal breaker. Diesel combustion is violent. The fuel auto-ignites from compression heat, causing a sharp pressure spike that creates a distinctive knocking sound. Industrial diesels were so loud you needed ear protection. Even the quietest diesel sounded like someone was inside the engine hitting it with a hammer in rhythm. Americans wanted their cars to purr, not clatter. Starting was a legitimate nightmare. Gasoline engines start easily because a spark plug will ignite fuel even when it's cold. Diesel engines need compression heat to ignite fuel, but when it's cold outside, the engine block absorbs that compression heat. Early diesels required glow plugs, ether injection, or external heat sources just to start in cold weather. Imagine trying to sell that to Americans. Before you can drive to work, you need to heat your engine for 20 minutes. Yeah, good luck with that. The fuel itself was problematic. Diesel in the 30s was basically heating oil. Dirty, smelled terrible, and most gas stations didn't carry it. You could buy it at truck stops and marine fuel docks, but your local corner station? Forget it. This created a chicken and egg problem. Nobody wanted diesel cars because you couldn't buy diesel fuel, and stations wouldn't stock diesel fuel because nobody had diesel cars. Detroit engineers had done the math and decided it wasn't worth solving these problems. The American public didn't want efficiency. They wanted power, speed, and status. Diesel offered none of those things. Case closed. Except Cummins hadn't gotten the memo about what was impossible. Or more likely, he'd gotten it and decided it was wrong. The engineering witchcraft that made it possible. The Cummins Model H diesel engine that went into the airflow was genuinely revolutionary, not in a showy way. There were no radical new inventions. Instead, it was a masterclass in execution, taking existing diesel technology and refining it specifically for automotive use. Let's start with the basic specifications. 4 cylinders, 140 cubic inches, about 2.3 liters in modern terms, 16.5:1 compression ratio, maximum power of 45 horsepower at 3,000 RPM. Torque peaked at 95 pound-feet at 1,800 RPM. Those numbers sound pathetic by modern standards, terrible even by 1934 standards. A Chevrolet Straight 6 made 50 horsepower. Ford's Flathead V8 made 75. But here's what matters. The Cummins diesel made that power while sipping fuel at a rate that made gasoline engines look like alcoholics at an open bar. The engine block was a special high-nickel iron alloy that provided strength without excessive weight. The cylinder head was aluminum, a rarity in 1934. This saved about 40 pounds compared to an iron head, while also improving heat dissipation. The crankshaft was fully counterweighted and balanced to limits that most gas engines didn't achieve. This reduced vibration significantly, but the real innovation was in the fuel injection system. Most industrial diesels use simple pump and injector setups with minimal timing control. Cummins developed what he called a precision injection pump with variable timing. As engine speed increased, injection timing advanced automatically. This maintained efficiency across the RPM range and allowed the engine to rev higher than conventional diesels. Cold starting got solved with a manifold heater and compression release mechanism. Before starting, you'd flip a lever that opened the compression release valves. This let the engine spin freely to build heat without fighting compression. After 30 seconds, you'd close the compression release and the engine would fire. Not elegant, but it worked. The noise problem got addressed through mounting. The engine sat on rubber isolation mounts, a relatively new concept in 1934. These damped the characteristic diesel clatter significantly. The result was still noisier than a gas engine, but tolerable. You could have a conversation at highway speeds without shouting. The fuel tank held 20 gallons, same as a standard airflow. But here's where the magic happened. At the diesel's cruising efficiency, 20 gallons would take you nearly 900 miles. Think about that. 900 miles on a single tank in 1934. Most cars of the era got 250 to 300 miles per tank at best. The total vehicle weight came in at 3,800 pounds, about 200 pounds heavier than a standard airflow coupe, but not catastrophically so. On paper, the car worked, but paper doesn't account for reality. Cummins needed to prove this thing could actually survive real-world use. Time for a road trip. The Indianapolis to New York, Death March, May 15th, 1934. Nathan Cummins and a company engineer named L.L. Red Flock climbed into the airflow diesel coupe in Indianapolis. Destination, New York City. Distance, roughly 800 miles. Purpose, prove that a diesel passenger car could handle a real cross-country journey. They didn't pamper the car. No special fuel, no support vehicles, no pre-planned stops. Just 2 guys, a diesel coupe, and whatever diesel fuel they could scrounge at truck stops along the way. The route went through Columbus, Pittsburgh, and across Pennsylvania. Not exactly gentle terrain. The Appalachian Mountains would test the diesel's low-speed torque and its ability to sustain load. The first 100 miles were uneventful. The car cruised at 50 miles per hour, about normal highway speed for 1934. The engine hummed along at 2,400 RPM in third gear, barely working. Cummins noted that fuel consumption was holding steady at about 45 miles per gallon. Let that sink in. 45 miles per gallon in a full-size coupe with a 3-speed transmission in 1934. Hills presented the first real test. Most diesel critics claimed that low horsepower would force diesel cars to crawl up grades. The airflow diesel proved them wrong. On a long grade outside Pittsburgh, the car maintained 40 miles per hour in second gear at 3,000 RPM. Not fast, but respectable. A standard airflow with Chrysler's 8-cylinder would have done maybe 50 on the same grade. The difference wasn't catastrophic. Truck drivers at fuel stops were fascinated and confused. "You're putting diesel in a car? That's not going to work." Then they'd watch the airflow pull away with no smoke, no drama, just smooth acceleration. One trucker in Pennsylvania reportedly said, "If that thing makes it to New York, I'll eat my hat." The Pennsylvania mountains were brutal. Sustained climbs at elevation tested cooling, tested the engine's ability to handle extended high-load operation. The oil temperature climbed, but stayed within limits. Coolant temperature was never an issue. The compression release for engine braking on descents worked perfectly, saving the mechanical brakes from overheating. Night driving revealed another advantage. Diesel fuel was available at 24-hour truck stops. Gas stations closed at night in 1934, but truck stops stayed open. The ZIAD airflow crew could fuel up any time. This flexibility was unexpected and useful. They averaged 50 to 55 miles per hour for most of the trip. Not blazing fast, but perfectly adequate for Depression-era highways. Total driving time was about 15 hours, spread over 2 days. They stopped overnight in Pennsylvania, not because the car needed rest, but because the drivers did. Fuel consumption varied with terrain. Flat highway stretches saw peaks of 48 miles per gallon. Mountain climbing dropped it to 38. The average for the entire trip, 46 miles per gallon. Total fuel consumed, 17.4 gallons for 800 miles. At diesel's price of 9 cents per gallon versus gasoline's 18 cents, the fuel cost for the trip was about $1.57. A comparable gas-powered car would have cost about $7 in fuel. The diesel saved $5.43 on a single trip. They rolled into New York on May 17th. The car ran perfectly. No mechanical issues, no overheating, no strange noises beyond the normal diesel clatter. The only problem was a minor oil leak from the injection pump, quickly fixed with a new gasket. Cummins immediately drove to automotive trade magazines and newspapers. "We just drove a diesel car from Indianapolis to New York at 46 miles per gallon. Your move, Detroit." The automotive press was stunned. This wasn't supposed to be possible. When Detroit started sweating. The Indianapolis to New York run generated headlines, but not the kind Cummins expected. Instead of "Revolutionary diesel car proves viable," the coverage was more like "Novelty diesel coupe complete stunt trip." The automotive establishment wasn't ready to admit they'd been wrong, but behind closed doors, Detroit was paying attention. Ford Motor Company sent engineers to examine the airflow diesel. Internal memos from June 1934, obtained through historical archives decades later, reveal genuine concern. One Ford engineer wrote, "If Cummins can achieve these economy figures with a first-generation automotive diesel, what happens when we perfect the technology? Our entire product line becomes obsolete." General Motors was even more worried. They'd spent millions developing and tooling for gasoline engines. Their business model depended on selling big engines, lots of cylinders, impressive horsepower numbers. A diesel that made 45 horsepower but cost half as much to fuel threatened everything. Worse, it made their engineering efforts look wasteful. GM secretly acquired a Cummins diesel engine and tore it apart in their Detroit labs. What they found frustrated them. There was no secret sauce, no magical invention, just good engineering, careful attention to detail, and a willingness to solve problems everyone else had decided were unsolvable. The GM report concluded that yes, diesel passenger cars were technically feasible, but undesirable from a marketing standpoint. Translation: "We could build this, but we don't want to." Chrysler was in the most awkward position. It was their airflow body that Cummins had used. They couldn't publicly condemn the diesel without admitting their own car made a good diesel platform. But they also couldn't embrace it without implying their gasoline engines were inefficient. They chose silence. Publicly, Chrysler said nothing about the Cummins diesel airflow. Privately, they tested diesel engines in several vehicle platforms. The real pushback came from the petroleum industry. Standard Oil and other major fuel companies were paying attention. Diesel fuel was a byproduct of gasoline refining, less valuable than gasoline. If cars switched to diesel en masse, refineries would have to adjust their entire production process. gasoline would become the byproduct instead of the primary product. This represented billions in potential disruption. Petroleum industry representatives started meeting with Detroit executives. The message was clear. Diesel passenger cars were bad for business. Both businesses. Car companies made money selling big engines. Oil companies made money selling gasoline. Diesel threatened both revenue streams. But the public was interested. Letters poured into automotive magazines asking when diesel cars would be available. Dealers reported customers specifically asking about the Cummins diesel. One Chrysler dealer in Indianapolis wrote to the factory, "I have a waiting list of 17 people who want to buy diesel airflows. When can you supply them?" The answer was never. Cummins tried to capitalize on the interest. He offered to sell diesel engines to any automaker willing to install them. He pitched the concept at industry conferences. He demonstrated the airflow diesel to anyone who would watch. Ford sent representatives. GM sent representatives. Everyone looked, everyone tested, everyone said the same thing. Very interesting, not for us. The excuse was always the same. Americans want power, not economy. But the real reason was simpler. Diesel passenger cars would disrupt a profitable status quo. Why fix what wasn't broken? At least from Detroit's perspective. The sales pitch. Nobody wanted to hear Cummins spent the rest of 1934 and into 35 trying to sell the diesel passenger car concept. He was pushing against a wall that didn't want to move. The technical arguments were winning. Nobody could dispute the fuel economy. Nobody could deny the engine worked. The airflow diesel racked up 50,000 miles of trouble-free operation. Cummins drove it everywhere, showed it to everyone. He conducted fuel economy runs that were independently verified. One run from Indianapolis to Detroit, witnessed by SAE officials, recorded 47.3 miles per gallon at an average speed of 52 miles per hour. But the marketing arguments were losing. Detroit kept saying, Americans don't care about fuel economy. And in Detroit, 1935, they were partially right. The Depression was easing slightly. Gas was cheap. The average American drove maybe 4,000 miles per year. Fuel costs, while not insignificant, weren't the top priority for most buyers. What Americans apparently wanted was smooth, quiet power. They wanted cars that sounded refined, not like tractors. They wanted effortless acceleration, not efficient cruising. The diesel car, despite its technical merit, wasn't giving them the emotional experience they associated with car ownership. Cummins tried different approaches. He calculated life cycle costs, showing diesel owners would save hundreds of dollars over 5 years of ownership. He emphasized reliability, the simplicity of diesel engines, the lack of complex ignition systems. He pointed out that diesel fuel was more stable than gasoline, safer to store, less prone to vapor lock in hot weather. None of it mattered. The perception problem was insurmountable. Diesel meant trucks, tractors, industrial equipment. Diesel meant working class. Diesel meant practical but boring. Americans wanted their cars to be exciting, even if that excitement was mostly imaginary. The automotive press didn't help. Reviews of the diesel airflow were technically accurate, but emotionally cold. Car and Driver wrote, "The Cummins diesel coupe accomplishes its mission with admirable efficiency and absolutely no soul." Motor Trend said, "One cannot help but admire the engineering while simultaneously dreading the prospect of owning one." Even enthusiasts who appreciated the technology couldn't bring themselves to want one. The diesel airflow was like vegetables. Good for you, but nobody really wanted it. By late 1935, Cummins admitted defeat. He'd proven diesel passenger cars were technically viable. He'd demonstrated fuel economy that wouldn't be matched by gasoline cars for another 40 years. He'd solved every engineering problem the critics said couldn't be solved, and absolutely nobody wanted to buy one. The diesel airflow went back to being a company demonstration vehicle. Cummins Engine Company returned to building industrial diesels, marine engines, and eventually truck engines. The dream of American diesel passenger cars died quietly. How America killed its diesel future. So what actually killed the diesel passenger car in America? It wasn't technical failure. The engineering worked. It wasn't reliability. The airflow diesel ran for years without major issues. It wasn't economics. The fuel savings were real and substantial. The reasons were more complicated and more stupid. First, there was the image problem. Americans in the 30s associated cars with status and identity. Your car said something about who you were or who you wanted to be. A diesel car said, "I'm practical and boring." Nobody wants to be practical and boring. European manufacturers didn't have this problem because European car culture was fundamentally different. Europeans bought cars primarily for transportation. Efficiency was valued. Practicality was admired. A diesel Mercedes wasn't seen as boring. It was seen as sophisticated. But America wasn't Europe. American car culture was built on excess, performance, and emotion. Diesel offered none of that. Second, the infrastructure problem was real. Even if diesel cars had sold, fueling them would have been difficult. Most gas stations didn't stock diesel. Creating a nationwide diesel distribution network for passenger cars would have required massive investment, with no guarantee of return. It was a classic chicken and egg problem that nobody wanted to solve. Third, Detroit's business model depended on planned obsolescence. They made money selling new cars every few years, and they convinced Americans this was normal. Annual model changes, new styling, more power. The diesel philosophy was the opposite. Build it once, build it right, run it forever. That's terrible for business. Fourth, the petroleum industry actively opposed diesel passenger cars. They made more profit on gasoline. Diesel was less refined, worth less per gallon. If America's car fleet switched to diesel, refineries would need to completely retool. The oil companies lobbied against diesel, quietly but effectively. They didn't need to ban it. They just needed to make sure Detroit wasn't interested in building diesel cars. Mission accomplished. Fifth, and this is important, the average American couldn't do the math. Cummins showed that diesel owners would save money over time. But people don't think long-term about car ownership. They think about the monthly payment, the purchase price, the immediate costs, the diesel engine added cost up front. The fuel savings came gradually over years. Americans are terrible at delayed gratification. Sixth, World War II was coming. By 1940, every industrial diesel engine in America was being diverted to military use. Tanks, trucks, ships, submarines. The idea of wasting diesel production capacity on passenger cars was actually unpatriotic. After the war, America was in full post-war boom mode. Big V8s, chrome, fins, power everything. The diesel moment had passed. The final nail was cultural. America came out of World War II as the world's superpower. We'd won the war with industrial might, including our superior gasoline engine technology. Diesel was German, Japanese, European. Americans built V8s because we could, because fuel was cheap, because excess was American. Efficiency was for losers who couldn't afford real engines. The Cummins diesel airflow became a museum piece. The technology that could have given America 46 miles per gallon in 1934 instead gathered dust. Europe laughs. Last, here's the kicker. While America was busy ignoring diesel passenger cars, Europe was embracing them. Mercedes-Benz introduced the 260D in 1936. Just 2 years after Cummins' demonstration, it was the world's first production diesel passenger car. Germans bought them specifically because they were efficient and practical. The 260D got about 35 miles per gallon. Not quite as good as the Cummins diesel, but close enough. More importantly, Mercedes kept developing the technology. By the 1950s, diesel Mercedes were common in Europe. They were taxi favorites because of their durability and economy. In Germany, diesel fuel was cheaper than gasoline due to different tax structures. This created economic incentive for diesel adoption that America never had. Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, Volkswagen all developed diesel passenger cars. By the 1970s, when the oil crisis hit America like a brick to the face, Europe already had mature diesel car technology. They'd been building and improving diesel passenger cars for 30 years, while America was building 4-barrel carbureted V8s. The irony is delicious. America invented the diesel passenger car concept. Nathan Cummins proved it worked in 1934. We then ignored it completely while Europe took the idea and ran with it. When fuel economy finally mattered to Americans in the 70s, we had to import diesel technology from Germany. Mercedes diesel cars became status symbols in America during the 70s and 80s. A diesel Mercedes said you were smart, sophisticated, practical, the exact opposite of how diesels were perceived in the 30s. The difference? Mercedes made diesel cool through German engineering mystique. They proved diesel cars could be luxurious, refined, desirable. By the 1990s, nearly half of European passenger cars were diesel. The technology had evolved. Direct injection, turbocharging, computer controls. Modern diesel cars were fast, quiet, efficient. Everything Cummins had promised back in 1934, but better. American manufacturers finally started offering diesel cars in the 70s. General Motors put diesel engines in everything from Oldsmobiles to Cadillacs. They were terrible. Converted gasoline engines that broke constantly. GM's diesel disaster set back American diesel acceptance by another decade. When American manufacturers finally learned to build proper diesel cars in the 2000s, it was with European technology. We'd completely lost the knowledge base that Cummins had started building in the 30s. The ghost that haunts every Prius. Every time someone buys a hybrid to save fuel, they're following the path Nathan Cummins tried to create in 1934. The specific technology is different, but the philosophy is identical. Use engineering to dramatically improve efficiency without sacrificing usability. The Cummins diesel airflow is the ghost that haunts American automotive history. It's proof that we could have had fuel-efficient cars 70 years before we actually did. It's a reminder that technical solutions existed, but cultural resistance prevented adoption. Think about the implications. If America had embraced diesel passenger cars in the 30s, our entire automotive history would be different. No gas lines in the 70s. Less dependence on foreign oil. Decades of reduced emissions compared to big gasoline engines. A culture that valued efficiency instead of excess. But we didn't. We chose horsepower over efficiency, emotion over logic, excess over practicality, and we paid for it. Every time gas prices spike, we're paying for the choice America made in 1935 to ignore Nathan Cummins and his 46-mile-per-gallon coupe. The lesson isn't subtle. Sometimes the best solution isn't the popular one. Sometimes the right technology appears decades before the market is ready. Sometimes genius gets ignored because it doesn't fit cultural expectations. The 1934 Cummins diesel airflow proved diesel passenger cars were possible. America chose to pretend they weren't. Europe listened, Europe won, and 60 years later, we're still trying to catch up to the efficiency levels Cummins achieved in 1934. That's not just ironic, that's tragic.